They still call it the night NATO rewrote its playbook. Not because of a war, but because of a training flight over the freezing black waters of the North Sea, where two jets, flying routine intercept patterns, triggered an incident so strange, so physics-bending, that every pilot who heard the tape later said the same thing. This wasn't training anymore. It began on a calm winter evening, somewhere between the drifting fog banks and the steel-colored horizon. A pair of NATO fighters, an RAF Lightning F6 and a USAF Delta Dart, were running a simple cross-border radar exercise. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic, just the kind of drill pilots sleepwalk through after years in the cockpit. But then came the first anomaly. The Dart's radar, famous for locking targets at impossible ranges, failed to paint the Lightning at point-blank distance. At the same time, the Lightning's pilot reported something no one believed at first. "I'm getting a heat signature above me, but there's nothing there." Controllers thought it was cloud clutter, maybe a sensor glitch, maybe atmospheric inversion. It wasn't. Within seconds, both jets began experiencing mismatched telemetry, one seeing a target too close, the other seeing nothing at all, while a mysterious echo kept jumping between altitude layers like it wasn't bound by inertia. What happened next forced both pilots into a split-second decision, one that nearly cost them their lives, and exposed a vulnerability in NATO training that no simulation had ever predicted. By the time the debrief ended, the room was silent. By the time the report reached Brussels, procedures were already being rewritten. And by the time the incident leaked to the rest of NATO pilots, they had a new saying: "If it can happen over the North Sea, it can happen anywhere." The North Sea was unusually quiet that night, the kind of quiet that made even veterans pilots feel like they were flying inside a sealed chamber. The RAF Lightning F6 sliced through thin layers of winter haze, its twin Avon engines leaving two narrow trails that glowed faintly under the moon. Squadron leader Mason Hale, call sign Frostbite, checked his gauges out of habit more than necessity. The exercise was routine, a cross-border intercept drill with their American counterparts. Nothing more. 100 miles away, the USAF Delta Dart, Ghost Lead, was climbing through 28,000 feet, its infamous Hughes radar painting the world with long-range confidence. Captain Reed Walker had flown this drill dozens of times. He knew the Lightning's strengths and weaknesses. He knew his own aircraft's legendary reach. Tonight was supposed to be predictable, controlled, safe. Then came the first ripple. "Control, Lightning 1! I'm not getting his return," Mason radioed, tapping his radar scope. "Is Dart Lead airborne?" "Affirmative," the controller replied. "He should be in your front quarter." But Mason saw nothing. No return. No echo. Just static where a supersonic interceptor should have been. At the same moment, Reed on the Delta Dart saw the opposite. Too much information. "Control, Ghost Lead. I have a contact. Extremely close. 10 miles. 8, 6. He paused. "That can't be right. Lightning isn't that fast." He switched to backup, but the picture only sharpened. Something was closing the gap at a rate that didn't match any known aircraft profile. Both pilots recalibrated. Both assumed it was just North Sea temperature inversion, a common annoyance, nothing more. But then Mason felt it before he saw it. A faint vibration in the throttle, a subtle pitch wobble, as if something above his aircraft disturbed the airflow, something large, fast, and invisible. He scanned the sky. "Control," Mason said, voice tightening. "I'm getting a heat shimmer above me." "Mecanopy, no visual contact." Reed responded instantly. "Negative. My radar shows you climbing towards something." The frequency went silent for a long second. This wasn't an exercise anymore. Something between them didn't belong in the air that night. And whatever it was It was moving in ways no NATO manual had ever prepared them for. Mason rolled the Lightning slightly left, just enough to catch any glint of metal against the moonlit haze, but the sky above him stayed empty, perfectly clean. Yet the heat shimmer on his canopy wouldn't go away. It was subtle, like the distortion you see above a runway on a hot day, except this wasn't a hot day, and there was nothing up there to distort anything. He checked his instruments again. Airspeed steady, altitude steady, engine temps normal. But that feeling, that instinct pilots develop only after thousands of hours, kept scratching the back of his mind. Something is off. Something is near. Reed in the Delta Dart wasn't doing much better. His radar blip kept jumping altitude bands, 32,000 feet, then 27,000, then 35,000 in the span of 2 sweeps. No aircraft in NATO could move like that. No weather balloon, no drone, no atmospheric echo had ever behaved this way. "Control, are you painting a third contact?" Reed finally asked. The controller hesitated. "Negative. Only 2 aircraft in your sector." Reed's voice dropped. "Then what the hell is this thing that's dancing between us?" Another silence. Mason switched to visual scan, sweeping the horizon in disciplined arcs. Lightning pilots had always joked that their aircraft's radar was so basic, half the intercept depended on eyesight rather than electronics. But tonight, eyesight wasn't helping. Whatever this thing was, it was staying just outside the realm of normal detection. Then it happened. A faint blip appeared on Mason's scope, just for a heartbeat, and it wasn't the Dart. The echo appeared behind him at 20,000 feet lower than his altitude, then jumped to 10,000 feet above in the next sweep. No acceleration, no transition, just instant relocation. "Mason," Reed called. "My system says you just passed under something climbing through Mach 1.2. "That's impossible," Mason snapped. "I'd hear a shockwave. I'd feel it." But he didn't. Nothing shook. Nothing roared. The sky stayed eerily calm. Reed checked again. The echo was now between them, almost as if it were watching both jets simultaneously. Then came the stomach-dropping moment. Both radar screens flashed an alert, not a lock, not a missile tone, something neither pilot had ever seen, a warning that didn't exist in NATO training manuals. And for the first time that night, both men realized this wasn't a malfunction. This was an intrusion. Something was in their airspace, and it wasn't following any known laws of flight. The alert tone stopped as abruptly as it began, leaving both cockpits in a dead, pressurized silence. Mason gripped the Lightning's stick tighter, waiting for the next anomaly. Engine surge, control stiffness, anything. But the aircraft held steady, almost unnaturally steady, as if the air itself had gone still around him. Then the North Sea night ripped open. A streak, no, a shadow, crossed Mason's peripheral vision, something moving far faster than his brain could register. He jerked his head left. Nothing. Right. Nothing. All he caught was the afterimage of motion, a blur that felt closer than safety allowed. "Reed," Mason said slowly. "Something just passed my 9 o'clock. Close. Very close." Reed didn't respond right away, which scared Mason more than the shadow. "Mason," Reed finally said, voice low. "My radar just drew a path. Whatever crossed you was going Mach 2.5 at less than 100 meters. Mason froze. Subsonic aircraft simply didn't get buzzed by something that fast without catastrophic turbulence. Yet the Lightning flew smooth, untouched, like nothing had passed at all. Reed's Dart wasn't as lucky. A sudden buffet slammed his airframe, just one jolt, but enough to knock his helmet against the canopy. His warning lights flickered, then reset. The aircraft stabilized, but his breathing didn't. "Contact just clipped my wake," Reed hissed, "but there's no sonic boom, no heat spike, no visual." Mason swallowed hard. "Reed, whatever's up here with us isn't playing by the rules." Before Reed could answer, both jets received a new reading, an altitude marker directly between their two aircraft, at a point neither of them occupied. Altitude, 31,300 feet. Speed, 0 knots, 0. "That's not possible," Mason whispered. Reed agreed. "Nothing up here hovers at 31,000 feet, not even our tankers." The hovering contact vanished on the next sweep, reappeared behind Reed, then blinked to Mason's high right. The jumps were instantaneous. No transition trail, no flight path, just teleportation. Then came the moment that nearly killed them. The unknown Echo dropped directly in front of Mason's Lightning at a closure rate that should have resulted in a fatal mid-air collision. Mason reacted on instinct, slamming the stick left and down, engines roaring as he dove into the dark. Reed's voice cracked across the radio. "Lightning 1! Brake! Brake! Brake!" Had Mason turned even a second later, the headlines would have honored him posthumously. Something had tested him, deliberately. And it wasn't finished. Mason's Lightning tore downward through a pocket of cold, denser air before he finally leveled out at 24,000 feet. His heartbeat pounded louder than the twin Avons behind him. He didn't know what he'd nearly collided with, but every instinct told him it was intentional. A test, a probe, a warning. Reed dropped altitude to join him, the dart slicing through the haze like a spear. "Mason, your brake looked like you were dodging a missile." "That wasn't a missile," Mason said. "Missiles don't stop at 0 knots, and they don't reverse direction." Reed exhaled sharply. "So we agree. This is not an aircraft." The controllers back at station were losing composure. Multiple voices overlapped on the frequency, trying to interpret the nonsensical telemetry. Some blamed temperature inversion. Others insisted it was radar ghosting. A few even suggested instrument interference from offshore platforms. But the pilots knew better. Pilots always know. "Mason, look at this," Reed said, voice rising. "It's predicting your next move." "What?" "My fire control computer is drawing anticipatory vectors, like it's trying to track something predicting where you will dodge." Mason didn't answer for a moment. His breathing slowed. His chest tightened. A threat predicting his reactions meant only one thing. This wasn't random interference. It wasn't a glitch. Something was studying them. Like prey. Then it happened again. Another impossible shift. Reed's radar painted the unknown contact mirroring Mason's Lightning. When Mason banked, it banked. When he climbed 200 feet, it climbed exactly 200. When he leveled, it leveled. "Mason, it's shadowing you," Reed whispered, "like it's copying your flight profile." Mason rolled sharply left to confirm. Instantly, Reed's radar recorded the shadow moving left at the exact same angle and rate. No delay, no inertia. "It's inside my control envelope," Mason said quietly. "It shouldn't know my inputs faster than my aircraft responds." Reed's voice hardened. "It's not copying the plane. It's copying you." A chill ran down Mason's spine. "You're saying it's learning the pilot, not the machine?" Reed didn't answer. He didn't need to. The contact suddenly accelerated, straight upward, going from 31,000 feet to 48,000 feet faster than either pilot could even blink. No climb arc, no thrust cloud, just vertical disappearance. Mason whispered the only words that captured the moment. "Reed, nothing on Earth flies like that." But the night wasn't done, because seconds later, their radios picked up something no one had expected. A return pulse. Not from ground radar, not from their own jets. From it, as if it had just scanned them back. The pulse hit both jets simultaneously, a brief, piercing static burst that wasn't quite electronic noise and wasn't quite a radio transmission. It felt intentional, as if someone had tapped both cockpits with a fingertip made of electricity. Mason flinched. "Reed, did you—" "Yeah," Reed cut in. "I felt it. My entire comm stack flickered." For half a second, every system in both fighters dimmed. Not shut down, not failed, just dimmed. Like someone lowering the lights in a theater before the main act begins. When Mason's instruments brightened again, his stomach dropped. His INS, inertial navigation system, had been wiped clean. Position, unknown. Velocity, unknown. Heading, unknown. "Mason, report!" the controller shouted. "I can't," Mason said. "My navigation is blank." Reed's gasp followed. "Mine, too. It just zeroed my entire INS like a fresh startup." The controllers scrambled, trying to reassign bearings, but without the jets knowing their own exact position, their ability to coordinate was nearly gone. Then came the second impossible reading. Altitude, 38,000 feet. Heading, undefined. Speed, 0 knots. Location, between both jets. The shadow had returned, hovering again at high altitude like a silent referee judging the chaos it had created. "Control, can we scramble AWACS?" Reed demanded. "Negative," the controller replied. "We're losing radar fidelity in your entire quadrant. You're in a blind sector." A blind sector that hadn't existed 10 minutes earlier. Mason steadied his breathing. "Reed, if it wanted us dead, we'd be gone." "And that's supposed to comfort me?" Reed shot back. "I'm saying it's observing us." The unknown contact shifted again, this time descending, but not in a fall or glide. It dropped from 38,000 to 28,000 feet in a perfect vertical line, like someone dragging an icon downward on a digital map. No speed reading ever changed. Then it stopped between them again. "Mason," Reed whispered, "I think it's communicating." Before Mason could respond, the pulse returned. But this time through their headsets, a soft oscillating tone that drifted higher, then lower, like sonar in open water. Reed's voice dropped to a whisper. "It's sweeping us, like it's scanning our cockpit audio." Mason swallowed hard. "Then it knows we're afraid." The tone faded. Silence returned. But then the unknown contact executed a maneuver no NATO pilot had ever trained for. It rotated around its own axis, without moving forward, backward, or sideways. A full rotational spin in place. A gesture that felt less like flight and more like a greeting. The rotational spin stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving the unknown contact suspended at 28,000 feet, as if gravity had forgotten it existed. Mason and Reed circled cautiously, keeping it within their limited instrument arcs, neither daring to close in nor peel away. Every instinct screamed that the wrong move could turn this encounter from bizarre to catastrophic. "Control, do we have any ground confirmation yet?" Reed asked. Static. Then a distant, trembling voice. "Negative. We've lost all returns in that grid. You two are the only eyes we have." Mason and Reed exchanged a silence that transcended radio waves. They were alone with something no manual, no briefing, no NATO war game had ever accounted for. Then the contact moved again, but not in a direction either pilot expected. Up? No. Down? No. Forward? No. It expanded. A faint, shimmering halo formed around the object, no glow, no color, just distortion, like the air itself was stretching. For a moment, Mason thought his canopy was fogging. Then the distortion widened, reaching outwards like ripples on black water. "Mason, are you seeing this?" Reed whispered. Before he could, he'd respond. The halo collapsed inward and released a pulse. Not a burst like before, but a patterned series of tones. Short, long, long, short, short. Reed's voice cracked. "That's not random. That's a sequence." The tones repeated. Then again, and again, each time slightly modulated. Mason felt his skin crawl beneath his flight suit. "Reed, it's data." Reed's breathing sharpened. "Morse? No. Too tonal. Could be frequency encoding. Could be..." The unknown contact suddenly shot straight upward. No transition, just instantaneous vertical ascent, vanishing into a higher altitude band none of their instruments could track. A split second later, their INS systems rebooted themselves. Position restored. Heading restored. Velocity restored. Every instrument righted itself as if nothing had ever happened. But the radios now carried something new, a faint repeating playback of the tones. Not from the unknown object, not from ground control, from the recording systems inside both aircraft. Mason's voice trembled. "Reed, that signal is now stored in our black boxes." Reed answered with the smallest exhale. "They're going to tear those apart in Brussels." The controllers finally broke through again, shouting with panic layered under protocol. "All aircraft return to base immediately." For the first time in their careers, Mason and Reed obeyed without question. Because whatever they had witnessed wasn't a threat, it was a message. And NATO had no choice but to listen. The hangar at RAF Luchar's was silent when Mason and Reed stepped out of their cockpits. No chatter, no ground crew banter, no routine banter about fuel temps or engine vibrations. Instead, a ring of officers, British, American, and a pair flown in so quickly their uniforms still carried airport dust, waited for them with expressions that made the pilots' stomachs tighten. Their flight suits were unzipped, their helmets removed, but they were not allowed to leave the hangar. Everything that followed felt less like a debrief and more like an interrogation. A long steel table was set up, 2 chairs, a dozen recorders, red lights blinking. The British wing commander began. "Gentlemen, what happened tonight was not meteorology, not radar inversion, not operator error. We are classifying this as an airspace intrusion of unknown origin." Reed leaned forward. "Sir, that was not an aircraft." Mason nodded. "And it wasn't a drone. Nothing that moves like that survives its own inertia." The room exchanged looks, not disbelief, but the kind of fear that comes from hearing exactly what they already suspected. A technician entered and whispered something into the commander's ear. He nodded once, then addressed the pilots. "Your black box recordings contain a structured multi-tone sequence, repeating, modulated, identical on both jets." The American colonel added, voice low, "This is not noise. Someone, or something, was transmitting." They played the recording. Those tones, the short, long, short pulses, echoed off the metal walls of the hangar like sonar in a cathedral. No one spoke while they played. No one breathed. Even the ventilation fans seemed to fall quiet, as if the building itself was listening. When the recording finished, the colonel clicked the device off. "This," he said, "is going to Brussels tonight." For the next 6 hours, Mason and Reed drew flight paths, described impossible maneuvers, reconstructed each radar jump, each pulse, each moment when physics simply stopped working. By sunrise, a NATO decision had been made. Every training manual referencing radar anomalies, sensor ghosts, and intercept procedures would be rewritten. New simulation modules, new formation spacing during night intercepts, new protocols for uncharacterized aerial behavior, and, most quietly, a new classification category, UAP-NQ, Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon, Non-Hostile, Questioning. But the final moment, the one Mason remembered for life, came when, The wing commander placed a hand on the file and said, "Gentlemen, whatever you encountered over the North Sea didn't come to hide." He paused, eyes narrowing. "It came to be noticed." Mason and Reed left the room exhausted, shaken, forever changed. Because NATO had not just witnessed an anomaly, it had received a signal. Before they left the briefing room, both pilots glanced back at the sealed black boxes, still replaying those strange tones on loop, as if waiting for someone to decode them. And if you want to know what NATO eventually discovered from that signal, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. What do you think Mason and Reed encountered that night? Tell me in the comments. I'm reading every theory,